Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. And now the Friday Crime Report. Citrus Springs, Florida, November 2021. In yet another example of the Christopher Rufo effect, two white men in Citrus County, Florida attacked a black man simply because. The attackers were 55-year-old Roy Lashley and 52-year-old Robert Lashley. The 24-year-old victim, who reports only identified by his initials, was walking toward a Family Dollar when he heard one of the thugs, Robert Lashley, yelling racial slurs at him from a parking lot across the street. Lashley then ran across the street just to attack this young man. Robert Lashley was then joined by his brother Roy Lashley, who began attacking the black victim with an axe handle. Eventually, police arrived, and Roy Lashley began attacking the deputies. So these two weren't going quietly, and yet the police didn't shoot either one of them, didn't choke them, didn't beat them bloody, and didn't tase them to death either. In other words, the police didn't do to these white offenders who were attacking them the things that they routinely do to black pedestrians and motorists who are not attacking them at all. Roy Lashley was booked locally for aggravated battery with a deadly weapon, battery on a law enforcement officer, and resisting a law enforcement officer. Robert Lashley was initially charged with just battery. Last week, the two have been indicted on federal hate crimes charges, and those charges can carry a maximum 10-year prison sentence and a fine of $250,000. And you can count the minutes until that immigrant Kristen Clark gives them a sweetheart plea deal. These white supremacists are not looking for a reason to carry out an anti-black race attack. They're just looking for any opportunity. And it's no accident that these things are happening in Florida, like the attack on the black teenager that I told you about in last Friday's crime report, because that state's government has declared that they are at war with black people, and they want to encourage as many anti-black confrontations as possible. And no matter how racist your behavior, the Florida government's made it clear they will stand behind anyone who calls themselves going at a black person. So, as we've seen in recent months, there's been a lot of anti-black race attacks taking place. These racists have correctly interpreted the steady drumbeat coming from the governor, racist Ron DeSantis, and his personal Goebbels, Chris Rufo. And what might the black response to being openly targeted like this be? We'll continue with the Moment of Truth in just a moment, but first, a word from the official sponsor of Black Empowerment, Power Tools. There's no telling when something's going to come up, so make sure you carry your power tools at all times. You never know when you're going to need to bring the hammer down, or when you'll have some trash that needs to be blown away, or some obstacle that requires cutting down. Don't get caught empty-handed. Keep your hammer close by. Keep that leaf blower at the ready, and always carry your steel. Power Tools. Because no matter what your day job or side hustle may be, there's no excuse for not being ready to put in some work. Our second crime file comes from Clermont County, Ohio, April 4th, 2020. Kyle Johnson and his girlfriend, Kendra Hoskins, were going through a rough patch, and it was about to get a lot rougher. For Kendra, anyway. The two had left Kendra's apartment together on April 4th, and they eventually parked at a Marathon station and were having an argument that eventually led to an altercation. Johnston shot Hoskins in the abdomen with the 9mm he had on him. Johnston had claimed to the police that Kendra had shot herself, though it seems the police were reluctant to accept that story. Keep in mind, this had happened in April 2020, over 2 years ago. Johnston wasn't indicted until December of 2020. That was 8 months later. The charges were murder, involuntary manslaughter, reckless homicide, felonious assault, weapons under disability, and tampering with evidence. On December 4th, a judge set bond at $125,000. Considering the charges, that's pitifully low, and it was about to get a lot more pitifully low because 3 weeks later, another judge reduced Johnson's bond further still, this time down to a measly $50,000. It took Johnston until February 23rd to scrounge the money together, but he bonded out, and all he was required to do was to report to the court regularly. Considering what he had been charged with, this wasn't a slap on the wrist, it was a sloppy kiss. Yep, there are some people who are just genetically immune from the law, but it seems that even this pitifully generous condition was too oppressive for Johnston to do because in March 2021, he tested positive for meth. and another bond review was scheduled for later that month. Amazing. He only had one job: keep his nose clean. No pun intended. The court, having seen that its bond conditions had been flagrantly breached, decided to keep the cash portion of Johnston's bond the same and simply order him to enter a drugs treatment program if he wanted to have his bond remain that way. So you have a guy who was indicted for murder and who wasn't even supposed to have a gun, but he did anyway. Felonious assault, involuntary manslaughter, tampering with evidence, and they let him out on bail twice because the court figured he was a low flight risk. I guess it makes sense. I mean, it's not like he was accused of anything serious. Well, you can probably guess what happened next. Not only did Johnston not attend his drug treatment program, he also stopped reporting to the court too. So in April 2021, the court scheduled a new bond hearing, but Johnston didn't bother to show up for that one either, so the court issued a bench warrant for his arrest. Prosecutors eventually learned that Johnston had fled to Georgia. And you won't be surprised to learn that Johnston already had warrants in Georgia too, for which he was promptly arrested. So here we are now in 2022, over 2 years after he committed his crime, 15 months after his indictment, and he's finally been brought back to Ohio to face those murder charges. And the court, showing that white privilege is the law of the land, offered him another bond, this time at $1 million cash, professional, or real estate. So even after he failed to appear, even after he was caught doing drugs, even after he fled the state to avoid prosecution, they didn't say he's going to be held without bond. They just said, okay, we'll make the bond really high this time. Johnston is currently awaiting trial with pretrial motions set for next week. But the point that I'm trying to make is that this is how the American injustice system works. You haven't heard about Johnston, have you? And you probably haven't heard much about the inbred Lashley brothers either. People probably in Florida haven't heard much about them. And why does the white media not report it? Probably for the same reasons that a judge gives a pitifully low bond to a man accused of murdering his girlfriend, and then another judge decides, well, heck, we're being too hard on the guy, let's go ahead and reduce it to next to nothing. And then when he flees and has to be recaptured, a third judge says, well, we don't want to take away any chance that he may not escape in the future, so we'll just go ahead and make it $1 million. Clearly, there's an overarching set of unwritten rules about how certain defendants are to be treated and how others are to be treated. Now, I don't know how Johnston's trial will turn out. He could be convicted, though given the past actions of the court, it's even money he'll be offered a sweetheart plea deal. And why not? He's been doing such a great job of keeping out of trouble so far, hasn't he? And that's this week's Friday Crime Report. Keep your eyes open and stay on alert, because there's a lot worse criminals out there than the ones the white corporate media chooses to show to you. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: James Porter, Nigel Davis, Everett Morris, Larry Amayo, and Amir Miller. Salute to them, and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.